Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 30th of April, comes to you from London. And we're seeing the dollar just sinking a little bit lower over the last couple of days, just putting it back into short-term bearish territory. But of course, we did have this break to a new two-year high, and we shouldn't be surprised to see that resistance line become support. So we may just pull back to test this before running again, but we're clearly bullish medium and long term. Just the short term has turned a little bit bearish. And if we look at the Eurodollar, that's ticking up this morning as a result of that weaker dollar, but short term bullish, but likely to be short-lived with these downside targets hanging over us as well. And if we look at the Japanese yen, we see the dollar sinking quite significantly here. So it didn't manage to break to new two-year highs on the dollar yen chart, and that's what we really need to see to be absolutely clear that the dollar is going to run higher. Sterling against the dollar is a little bit stronger this morning, sitting at 129.50, but obviously still bearish on that long-term chart, and we do still have these downside targets hanging over us. We'll get another downside target on this thrust as well. Against the euro, we see that sterling is actually holding its short-term strength, lagging line coming back into the cloud, but looking bullish on all three time frames. So it's really about euro weakness. And against the Swiss franc, we see sterling is actually recovering a little bit too, sitting at 131.80 this morning. Against the Aussie dollar, sterling holding its strength at around 183. Looking at Bitcoin, sitting fairly static, having fallen last week. We've been very flat around this 5,150 level, but still holding that gain we saw in April. The S&P 500 index was up slightly last night, just edging higher. The Nasdaq also just pushing that little bit higher, and the Dow is just not yet managing to make new all-time highs. The Russell 2000 index, the broader based index for the US market, also just struggling to be anywhere near the previous high that we saw at the middle of last year. Futures are down slightly this morning. We've seen the S&P future down 0.1%, the Nasdaq E-mini down 0.2%. That's probably enough for us to say that the US might open a little bit lower this morning. The UK market flat, virtually unchanged, and the same for midcaps, so little action there. The DAX is down nearly 0.25%, and the CAC 40 is down nearly 0.5%, so we're seeing continental stocks falling a bit more heavily. Japan is down very, very slightly, 0.07%, and the Hang Seng actually down nearly 0.75%. The S&P, the Shanghai Composite Index is actually up 0.5%. Production numbers in China were a little bit disappointing overnight, but in fact that's not really had a big impact on the Chinese stock market. The Sensex down 0.4%, just not managing to hold its gains of late, and the Aussie market down 0.5%, but has had a very good run this month. So looking at crude oil, we're sitting at $72 on Brent crude, not enough to take us short-term bullish, and WTI sitting at 63.60, again not enough to take us short-term bullish. No clear targets in either direction. US nat gas sitting at $2.60. We are short-term bullish here, but in the scheme of the medium and long-term charts, no really big recovery going on there. Gold is up slightly this morning. We're still in short-term bullish mode at $12.83. We do have an upside target of $13.09. Getting back above this $1,300 level would be significant. We may just be finding support on the daily cloud, but on the weekly cloud we've been hitting some resistance, so interesting to see how those two play out. Looking at silver, we are bullish on the short-term chart, and US 10-year yields actually just pushing that little bit lower, so we're still sitting around that 2.5% mark. Looking at stocks overnight, looking at the Dow Jones first of all, we've got Goldman Sachs. They're up 1.9% overnight. Not enough quite to break to new highs here, so still has work to do. Upside targets though that are emerging here for Goldman's. We're just fighting resistance on that long-term chart at the moment. The relative not quite turning just yet. Looking at JP Morgan Chase, the banks were strong obviously. That's a much better looking chart, and we're at 1.4%. We've got this 14% upside target to play for. That pattern looking quite strong indeed, and we're seeing the relative here has really turned, so that's quite key. Intel was down a further 2.5%. They've had a terrible week, and last week on Friday they just fell from their high. Procter and Gamble down 1%, but the chart's still looking pretty good. Tech was. It will be interesting to see how tech goes today. Google reported results last night below expectations, and we saw a fall away of about 7% in the aftermarket. Tesla were actually up 2.7%, but that's not enough to break the fact that they have fallen through support here. So lots of downside targets for Tesla. Hard to see how they will move out of that. And looking at the other side of the coin, we can see here we've got JB Hunt Transport. They were down 2.7%. Intel, which we just talked about, still quite a lot of stocks in a mixed picture. Looking at Apple, we didn't see a change on Apple last night, but that's still looking pretty good. Google were actually up on expectation of their results, breaking to a new high, but it'll be interesting to see how they react today. As I said, down 7% in the aftermarket, so quite key there. Facebook actually up a further 1.7% as well, and looking stronger all the time. Last of all, we take a look at the Aussie market. So you see here that we have Aveo Group. They're up 10%. Not enough really to change the long-term picture, but the short-term picture moving, and that relative might just be turning. So looking quite interesting there. Costa Group Holdings, they're up 3.6%. Not enough to change the chart on that chart. And Domain Holdings was the worst performer, down 7%. Again, hitting long-term resistance on the weekly chart. Taking a quick look at China, we had a mixed picture in China. We saw here a bit more stocks up than down, and the Nifty in India, we see here the HCL Technologies was the best performer, up 3.3%, breaking to new highs. This chart looking really good upside targets, and the relative just slowly building, so quite good there. And looking at Yes Bank, we see here we're sitting at they were up down 28%. So having started to recover, just fallen away very dramatically yesterday. So back into really clearly bearish territory. Main important thing is, will they actually manage to hold that support level? India Bulls Housing were down 8% as well, so again this recovery being thwarted. Looking into Europe this morning, first of all look at the UK market. Here we see the live prices updating from Yahoo Finance. Micro Focus were up 22%, so that's a massive jump for them this morning, so really quite key there. And if we look at Standard Chartered, we see here they were up 4.3%. And on the downside, we've got NMC Health. They down 3.2% this morning. Looking at the 250, we've got Funding Circle. They're up 3.6% this morning. And Cyrus Minerals down a massive 16%, really falling away. They were showing up in that candle, just fallen out of bed. The Euro Stocks 50, if we look at Orange, they're the worst performer this morning, down 4%. Chart really been very choppy and not looking great. Telefonica, we're seeing telecom shares generally falling away here, and Nokia as well. And again, we're seeing these live pricing coming in here from Yahoo Finance. Amadeus IT Group, the best performer, up nearly 1%, and Philips up 2/3%. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.